I was cast aside for being infertile. Then a mountain man told me, I have 9 kids. Come. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant smoke as I stood outside the boarding house, watching the sun sink behind the jagged peaks of the Montana Territory. November 1868 had brought an early cold that settled into bones and wouldn't let go. I pulled my shawl tighter, feeling the familiar weight of fabric straining across my shoulders. Sarah Mae Dawson. That was the name I'd been given 24 years ago, though lately it felt more like a burden than a gift. The name whispered in pitying tones by the church ladies back home. The name struck from a wedding announcement that had been printed but never distributed. I'd left home 6 months ago, unable to bear another day of my mother's disappointed sighs or my father's carefully averted eyes. The boarding house in this rough-edged mining town needed a cook, and I needed to be anywhere but that suffocating parlor where I'd once planned my wedding. Infertile! Dr. Harrison had delivered the diagnosis like a death sentence, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Her womb is inhospitable. Marriage would be inadvisable. Thomas Whitmore had broken our engagement the next morning. I couldn't even blame him. What man wanted a wife who couldn't give him children? What man wanted a wife who looked like me, round and soft where women were supposed to be delicate and bird-like? The boarding house door swung open behind me, and Mrs. Calloway's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Sarah, those miners will be wanting their supper soon. Stop your mooning and get back to the kitchen." I turned to obey, but a commotion down the street made me pause. 3 cowboys on horseback were weaving unsteadily, bottles glinting in their hands. Their laughter had that mean edge that alcohol brings to cruel men. I should have gone inside immediately. Instead, I started down the wooden walkway toward the general store, needing flour for tomorrow's bread. It was a miscalculation that would change everything. "Well, well," one of the cowboys slurred, blocking my path. "What do we have here? A whole lot of woman." His companions laughed, and I felt my face burn. I tried to step around them, but another moved his horse to cut me off. "Where are you going, sweetheart? Stay and talk a while." "Please," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. "Let me pass." "Aw, don't be like that. We're just being friendly." The third cowboy reached down as if to touch my hair, and I flinched backward, stumbling off the walkway into the muddy street. They laughed harder. Then a shadow fell across us all. I looked up to see a man, no, a mountain made flesh. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the dying sun. His hair was long, streaked with silver, and his face was weathered like ancient bark. He wore buckskin and fur, and something about him made the very air feel different. He didn't shout. He simply looked at the cowboys and said, in a voice like distant thunder, "Leave!" The 3 men suddenly looked very small, very drunk, very aware of their mortality. They rode off without another word. The mountain man looked down at me, and I saw his eyes were the color of storm clouds. There was something in that gaze, not pity, but something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, perhaps. Sorrow, meeting sorrow. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said quietly. "This place isn't kind." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering dark as silently as he'd appeared. I stood there trembling, not entirely from fear. That night, I asked Mrs. Calloway about him. "Elias Thorne," she said. her voice unusually soft. "Lives up in the high country, comes down for supplies maybe once a month. They say he's got a whole passel of children up there, though nobody knows where they came from. His wife died 20 years back in a blizzard. Some say he's gone strange from grief and solitude. Others say he's the most decent man in the territory. I didn't see him again for 2 weeks, but I thought about him often, about the way he'd simply stood there, solid as the mountains themselves, about how he looked at me like I was a person worth defending. Then I started noticing things. A stack of firewood appeared outside my small room behind the boarding house, neatly split, perfectly dry, enough to last a week. Mrs. Calloway swore she hadn't ordered it. When I walked to the general store in the early morning, I sometimes glimpsed a tall figure on the ridge above town, barely visible in the mist. Gone before I could be certain he was real. One evening, I found fresh venison hanging on the boarding house's back porch, wrapped in clean cloth. The butcher hadn't delivered it. No one claimed responsibility. I began to understand in some wordless way that I was being watched over. December brought snow that transformed the rough mining town into something almost beautiful. It also brought more work, as travelers sought shelter from the killing cold. I spent long hours in the kitchen, my hands chapped and reddened, my back aching. I was carrying a basket of vegetables from the root cellar when a gust of wind nearly knocked me over. Suddenly, there was warmth at my back. Someone had stepped behind me, using their bulk to shield me from the worst of the gale. I turned to find Elias Thorne there, his long coat open as if he'd just wrapped me in it. "The wind's getting worse," he said. "Storm coming." "Thank you," I managed, "for this, for everything." He looked confused. "The firewood, the meat. I know it was you." Something flickered in those gray eyes. "You needed them." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My wife used to say that kindness doesn't need a reason. But if you want one, you looked like someone who'd forgotten she was worth protecting." My throat tightened. "Most people don't think I'm worth much of anything." "Then most people are fools." He left before I could respond, but something had shifted between us. Some invisible wall had developed a crack. After that, I saw him more often. He'd appear at the general store when I was shopping, silently carrying my heavy packages. He'd be outside the boarding house when I finished work late, just standing there in the shadows until I was safely inside. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. I learned his story in pieces from his rare comments and Mrs. Calloway's gossip. Elias had been married young to a woman named Mary, who died when he was out on a hunting trip. The blizzard came up sudden and fierce, and by the time he fought his way home, she'd frozen in their cabin, the fire dead, their unborn child dead with her. He'd blamed himself for 20 years. The children came later. A Blackfoot girl whose parents were killed by settlers, twin boys found half-starved in an abandoned mining camp, a Mexican child fleeing violence, others each with their own tragedy. Elias had found them, or they'd found him, and he'd given them shelter when no one else would. 9 children, all misfits and orphans, living in a cabin somewhere in the high mountains. "He's a strange one," Mrs. Calloway said, "but those children are healthy and educated. He teaches them to read, would you believe? Brings down books from somewhere. They say he sits up nights reading to them by firelight." I thought about that often. This huge, rough man reading bedtime stories, braiding a little girl's hair, teaching boys to be gentle with things weaker than themselves. I found myself knitting in my spare moments, thick wool socks, mittens, scarves. I told myself they were just extras, that I'd find some use for them. But really, I was knitting them in child sizes, 9 sets in different colors. I never gave them to Elias. I was too afraid of what it would mean. Winter deepened, and with it, something else grew. Every time I saw Elias, my heart did something complicated in my chest. Every time our hands accidentally brushed when he handed me a package, I felt it for hours afterward. But I kept silent. What could I possibly offer a man like that? I was barren, useless in the way that mattered most in this hard land. He already had children, 9 of them. What he needed was a woman who could give him more, who could truly be a mother, not just a presence in the kitchen. What I didn't know was that Elias was fighting his own battle. He'd come to town more frequently than necessary, inventing reasons to check on me. Each time he saw me, solid and warm and alive, something in his chest loosened and tightened simultaneously. He wanted to protect me. He wanted to know me. He wanted things he'd sworn he'd never want again. But he was 53 years old, weathered and damaged. What could he offer someone like Sarah, who was young enough to start fresh, who deserved better than a haunted man in a cabin full of other people's children? He stayed away for 3 weeks in January, trying to forget her. It didn't work. The fire started on a Thursday night. I was upstairs helping Mrs. Calloway inventory linens when we smelled smoke. By the time we realized it was coming from the kitchen, that the old wood stove had finally betrayed us, the ground floor was an inferno. The other boarders fled down the front stairs. Mrs. Calloway made it to the window and climbed down the trellis, screaming for me to follow. But the smoke was so thick, the heat so intense. I couldn't find the window, couldn't find anything but burning darkness and choking ash. I was going to die here, alone, unmourned, having never really lived at all. Then something massive crashed through the door. Through the smoke I saw him, Elias, his face covered with a wet cloth, his eyes wild with terror. He lifted me as if I weighed nothing, cradling me against his chest as he ran through the flames. I felt him stagger, heard him grunt in pain, but he didn't stop. We burst out into the freezing night, and he laid me in the snow far from the burning building. His hands were shaking as he checked me for injuries, patting down my dress, looking for burns. "Are you hurt? Sarah, are you hurt?" I'm fine," I gasped. "Your hands—" His palms were blistered and raw where he'd beaten down the burning door. He didn't seem to notice. People were running, shouting, forming bucket lines that would be useless against that inferno. But Elias just knelt there in the snow, his huge frame shaking, staring at me with an expression of such raw anguish that it hurt to see. "I thought," his voice broke, "I thought I'd lost you." "You barely know me," I whispered. "That doesn't matter." His hands, those burned, trembling hands, came up to cup my face with impossible gentleness. "I've been alone for 20 years because I was afraid. Afraid to care again, afraid to lose again. But Sarah, these past months, watching you, talking to you, knowing you were in the world, I've been alive again. And tonight, when I thought you were dying in there, I knew." "Knew what?" "That I'd already lost, that I'd already given my heart away, whether I meant to or not. I lost Mary, and it nearly killed me. But living half a life because I'm afraid, that's another kind of death." Snow fell around us, white. and silent. Behind us, the boarding house collapsed in a roar of sparks. "I have nothing," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't give you children. I can't give you anything a real wife should—" "Stop!" The word was fierce. He pulled me closer until I could feel his heartbeat through all those layers of buckskin and wool. "I have 9 children who need a mother. I have a heart that needs someone to care for. I don't want more babies, Sarah. I want you, just you." "But I'm beautiful," he said firmly, "kind, strong, everything I never thought I'd find again." I was crying now, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. All the years of shame, of feeling unwanted and unworthy, were cracking open. "Come home with me," Elias said. "Come meet my children. Let me show you what family can mean." I should have been terrified. This was all too fast, too strange. But instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." The cabin was a full day's ride into the mountains, up trails I never would have found alone. Elias had borrowed a gentle mare for me and kept his own horse close beside mine, ready to catch me if I slipped. We rode through forests of pines so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. We crossed frozen streams where ice sang in crystalline tones. The world up here was clean and harsh and honest in ways that towns never were. "They'll be curious," Elias warned as the cabin came into view, "and loud, and probably terrifying." I laughed despite my nervousness. The cabin was larger than I'd expected, made of thick logs chinked with mud and moss. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and I could hear voices inside, shouting, laughing, the thunder of running feet. Elias dismounted and helped me down, his hand steady on my waist. Then he opened the door. Chaos. 9 children of various ages and origins froze mid-motion, staring at us. A little girl of perhaps 6 had been chasing a boy who looked to be 12. 2 teenagers, the twins Mrs. Calloway had mentioned, stood by the fireplace holding what looked like a half-carved wooden bird. A beautiful Blackfoot girl of about 15 watched from the corner, protective and wary. "This is Sarah," Elias said simply. "She's going to stay with us for a while." The smallest child, a Mexican boy of maybe 4, walked up to me and tilted his head back to study my face. "Are you going to be our mama?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Every eye was on me. I'd like to be," I said, "if you'll have me." The little boy grabbed my hand. "Okay, I'm Mateo. That's Dove." He pointed to the Blackfoot girl. "And that's Samuel and Simon, and that's Mary." Named after Elias's first wife, I realized. "And that's Catherine and John and Thomas and little Ruth." They crowded around me then, curious and cautious. I saw it in their eyes, the wariness of children who'd been abandoned before. They were waiting for me to reject them, to leave, to prove that love was always temporary. "I make good biscuits," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "And I know stories, and I've never met a person who couldn't be improved by a warm quilt." Dove laughed at that. The first crack in her careful armor. Over the following days, I learned the rhythms of the cabin. Elias rose before dawn to check the trap lines and chop wood. The older children had chores, fetching water, tending the animals, keeping the fire fed. The younger ones studied from a precious collection of books that Elias guarded like treasure. I took over the cooking and found joy in feeding so many hungry mouths. I mended clothes and told stories and gradually, carefully, earned their trust. Dove was the hardest. She'd been the woman of the house for years, helping Elias manage the younger children. She saw me as a threat. One night, I found her outside crying. "He's going to send me away now," she said. "Now that you're here, he won't need me anymore." I sat down beside her in the snow, feeling it soak through my skirts. "That's not how love works," I said. "Hearts don't have a limit. They just grow bigger to hold everyone who needs holding. Elias loves you. That won't change because he loves me too." "How do you know?" "Because I see the way he looks at you, the same way he looks at all of them, like you're precious, like you're his." Dove turned to me, her dark eyes searching. "And how does he look at you?" I felt my face heat. "I don't know. Like you're the sun," she said softly. "Like he'd been walking in darkness and forgot what warmth felt like." After that, Dove and I became allies. Christmas came, and with it, the socks and mittens and scarves I'd knitted. I gave them out on Christmas morning, one set for each child, and watched their faces light up. Some had never received a gift before. Elias gave me a wooden box he'd carved, intricate with flowers and birds. Inside was a ring made of braided silver wire, delicate and beautiful and clearly made by unpracticed hands. "I'm not good at making things pretty," he said, "but I slipped it on my finger. It's perfect." That night, after the children were asleep, Elias and I sat by the fire. His hand found mine, those calloused fingers intertwining with my own. "Marry me," he said, "not because you have nowhere else to go, not because I need help with the children. Marry me because I love you, Sarah Dawson. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you hum while you cook. I love how you taught Mateo to tie his shoes and how you sat up all night with Ruth when she had nightmares. I love that you're here, real and solid and mine if you'll have me." "I can't give you children," I said, needing him to understand. "You already have," he replied. 9 of them. "And they need you as much as I do?" We were married in January, in a ceremony so simple it made my first engagement seem like a cruel joke in comparison. A traveling preacher happened through, and we stood in the snow outside the cabin with all 9 children as witnesses. I wore a dress Dove had helped me make from fabric Elias bought on his last trip to town. It was simple and warm and fit me perfectly. Elias wore his best buckskin and had trimmed his beard. The preacher's words were brief. "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" We both said yes. The ring Elias had made was already on my finger. He added a simple gold band he'd had made in town, hammered and thick and strong. "I will not let you be alone," he said, his voice carrying across the snowy clearing. "Not ever." I thought of all the years I'd believed myself unworthy, all the times I'd looked in the mirror and seen only flaws, all the moments I'd been certain no one would ever choose me. "I choose you," I whispered, "now and always." The children cheered. Mateo threw snow in the air like rice. Ruth cried happy tears. Dove smiled that rare, beautiful smile that transformed her face. And I became part of a family I'd never imagined could exist. The months that followed were hard in the way that all meaningful things are hard. The cabin was crowded and noisy. The work was endless. Winter in the high country was brutal, and there were days when we ran dangerously low on supplies, when the cold seeped into everything, when tempers frayed. But there was also laughter, so much laughter. There were nights when Elias read to all of us by firelight, his deep voice turning simple stories into magic. There were mornings when I woke to find Mateo and Ruth had climbed into our bed, seeking warmth and comfort. There were afternoons when the older children taught me to snowshoe, and I fell so many times we all ended up lying in the snow, gasping with laughter. Elias and I grew together in those months, learning each other's rhythms, discovering that love in middle age was different from youthful passion, deeper, quieter, but no less intense. He'd hold me at night, and I'd feel safe in a way I'd never known was possible. "Tell me about your first wife," I said one night. He was quiet for a long moment. Mary was sunshine, all light and joy and music. She made everything feel possible. When she died, I thought I'd died too. "Do you still love her?" "I'll always love her. But Sarah," he turned to face me in the darkness, "love isn't a finite thing. Loving her doesn't mean I love you less. If anything, it means I understand how precious this is, how rare, how worth protecting." I pressed my face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. March brought the first signs of spring, and with them, something else. I woke one morning feeling strange, sick, but not quite, exhausted, but restless. My body felt different in ways I couldn't articulate. I ignored it for days, certain it was just fatigue or illness. But then I missed my monthly bleeding, and then another week passed, and I was still sick every morning, and my breasts were tender, and no, it wasn't possible. Dr. Harrison had been certain, but my body knew what my mind refused to accept. I was pregnant. I didn't tell anyone at first. I couldn't. The fear was too great. Fear that I was wrong, that I'd lose the baby, that I'd finally have to face the full weight of my barrenness when this turned out to be nothing. But my belly began to swell. By May, there was no hiding it any more. Dove noticed first. "Sarah," she said one morning, her eyes wide, "are you?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She threw her arms around me and screamed with joy, bringing all the other children running. They surrounded me, talking over each other, asking questions, making wild predictions about whether the baby would be a boy or girl. I found Elias in the barn, checking on the horses we'd acquired for spring planting. He looked up when I entered, smiled that rare smile that transformed his weathered face. "The children are in quite a state," he said. "What's happened?" I couldn't find words. Instead, I took his hand and placed it on my belly, where the smallest curve was just beginning to show. His expression went through shock, confusion, understanding, and then something I'd never seen before. His eyes filled with tears, this man who'd seemed made of stone. "But you said," the doctor said. "I know. I don't understand it either. But Elias, we're going to have a baby." He dropped to his knees right there in the barn, pressing his face against my stomach, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I ran my fingers through his gray-streaked hair, my own tears falling freely. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything I never thought I'd have again." "We're giving each other everything," I corrected. The pregnancy was difficult. At my age and size, every ache felt magnified. But Elias was there through all of it, bringing me tea for the morning sickness, rubbing my swollen feet, helping me move when my belly grew so large I felt like a ship in full sail. The children were endlessly fascinated. They'd put their hands on my stomach to feel the baby kick. They'd argue about names. They'd draw pictures of what they imagined their new sibling would look like. I'd never felt so loved, so wanted, so completely, utterly myself. The baby came in December, almost exactly a year after I'd first come to the cabin. Labor was long and frightening, but Dove, who'd helped deliver several babies in her old village, stayed calm and confident. And then, after hours of pain and fear and struggle, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby crying. "A girl," Dove said, placing the tiny, perfect creature on my chest. "A healthy, beautiful girl." I looked down at this impossible miracle, this child I'd been told I could never have, and felt something shift in the very foundation of my being. All those years of shame, of feeling broken and less than, they cracked apart and fell away. Elias entered the room, and I'd never seen such an expression on his face. Wonder, joy, pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" I asked. He took her with the careful confidence of a man who'd held many babies, cradling her against his broad chest. She was so tiny in his arms, this mountain of a man and this fragile new life. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to our loud, chaotic, perfect family." The other children crowded in then, wanting to see, to touch, to welcome their new sister. Mateo very seriously explained that he would teach her everything important. Ruth promised to share her favorite doll. The twins argued about who would get to hold her first. I watched them all, this impossible family I'd found in the wilderness, and felt complete in a way I'd never imagined possible. We named her Hope, because that's what she was. Spring came again, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes and the sound of the creek running high with snowmelt. I sat on the porch of our cabin, nursing Hope, while watching the other children play in the clearing. Elias sat beside me, whittling a toy horse for Mateo's birthday. His hand rested on my knee, casual and comfortable. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Taking in so many of us?" He looked up, genuinely confused. "Regret what? Finding the thing that makes life worth living? We're a lot of work. So is anything worth having." He set down the horse and turned to me. "Sarah, before you came, I was just surviving, going through the motions. The children had food and shelter, but I'd forgotten how to really live. You reminded me. You reminded all of us. I didn't do anything special. You loved us, all of us, exactly as we were. That's everything." Hope finished nursing and made a soft sound of contentment. I shifted her to my shoulder, patting her back gently. Elias reached over to stroke her downy hair, his expression impossibly tender. "I used to think I was cast aside," I said quietly, "that being told I was infertile was the world's way of saying I didn't matter, that I'd never be complete. And now?" I looked at our life, the children laughing, the mountain standing eternal, the man beside me who'd seen past every flaw to the person beneath, the daughter in my arms who shouldn't exist but did anyway, perfect and real and mine. Now I know that I was never broken. I was just waiting for this, for you, for home. Elias leaned over and kissed my forehead. We were both waiting. Thank God we found each other. Inside the cabin, someone was starting dinner, probably Dove, who'd become an excellent cook. The smell of fresh bread drifted out through the open door. The twins were singing some folk song they'd learned, off-key but enthusiastic. Ruth was showing Catherine how to braid grass into chains. This was my life now, not the one I'd imagined as a young girl dreaming of white weddings and polite society, not the one I'd been told I could never have, but this, wild and rough and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. I was no longer the girl who'd been cast aside for being infertile. I was Sarah Thorne, mother to 10, wife to the best man I'd ever known, and finally home. The mountains stood witness to our joy, ancient and knowing. They'd seen countless lives come and go, countless stories of survival and love and redemption. Ours was just one more tale in the endless saga of the wilderness. But it was ours, and it was real, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.